With the government literally changing the way they record excess deaths to make there be less excess deaths, is this a time to analyse what's happened in the last 3 years with more scrutiny than ever? Of course it is. Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage to truth and freedom. Remember, you can support our content by clicking the link in the description. You get an extra video every single week. You get to join us for live conversations. The conversation that I had with Pierre Kory about the war to control the efficacy of ivermectin, the war to control information around excess deaths, is extraordinary and astonishing. What I want you to recognise about Pierre Kory is that he is the kind of honest-to-God, decent physician, academic and scientist that we require at the heart of public policy, not a maligned and shamed figure who was subject to attacks, slurs and smears on his reputation that I can personally identify with, all because he was speaking the truth at a time where speaking the truth was uniquely criminalized. This is a fantastic conversation. You're going to love it. You're going to learn from it. Maybe you'll even consider acquiring his book. There's a link to that in the description as well. And you're going to want to watch the full conversation over in the sweet stream of freedom. Let's have a look at it. Whilst we were told that the orthodoxy that was under attack was science itself, Fauci, of course, famously said, "I am science," and that, as is often the case, ordinary people were cast as idiots for their spirit of inquiry when precisely the opposite was true. It isn't science that's been questioned. It's the corporatization of science. It's science as a subset of other imperatives. Because true science would be an open analysis and examination of all of the data, including conflicting data, so that a proper conclusion might be reached. How is the story of ivermectin a good metric for understanding the corporatization of science, the co-opting of science, and the corruption of science?
Let me just tell you kind of the inspiration I had for the book, and kind of, actually, when I first had that inspiration, I didn't have a book in mind, I had a lecture in mind. But what happened to me is, you may know this, I gave a testimony in the U.S. Senate on the critical need for ivermectin.
Actually, I saw that.
Yeah.
That was right near the beginning of it. Oh yeah, that's all just come making sense now.
And, you know, that kind of went viral. It kind of brought ivermectin as a topic around therapeutics.
Yeah.
Very soon after that, my life and those of my colleagues in my organization started to go sideways.
No way. What do you mean? What happened?
Oh, I lost a job pretty immediately. My papers started getting retracted that had passed peer review by expert scientists, 4 rounds of peer review, and just got retracted from the journal.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. A hit job started appearing in the media, fringe, quack, radical, anti-vaxxer.
Oh, no.
And so I wasn't sure what was going on. But here's my story, is that in March of 21, about 4 months later, I got an email from a researcher, actually an expert on vitamin D. His name's Professor William B. Grant. Didn't know who he was, saw the email. It was 2 lines. It said, "Dear Dr. Kory, what they're doing to ivermectin, they've been doing to vitamin D for decades." And it included a link to an article called The Disinformation Playbook. I think if you haven't seen the article, it's a very quick read. I think your listeners and viewers would love to read that, because I read it. And
Where would we find this Disinformation Playbook?
Oddly, if you put that in Google, it gets you right to the article. It's written
by... Not for long.
Yeah, exactly. It's written by an organization called the Union of Concerned Scientists. And it's published in 2017, but it outlines these 5 tactics that industries deploy when science emerges that's inconvenient to their interests.
Wow.
And they're named after American football plays. So it's the fake, the fix, the blitz, the screen, the diversion. Cool. And then they give you these examples. And I started to read it, and it's like I got the teacher's edition to the modern world, because suddenly everything made sense. And I realized when I read that article...
Did you give yourself chills?
Little bit, like more chills and light bulbs, like yeah.
End of Usual Suspects. Oh my God! Shit! Oh no, it's Kevin Spacey.
You know, it's something on that, because it literally was a formative moment for me and in COVID, and because I saw the descriptions of the tactics, and I said, they've done that 3 times. They did that yesterday. They're doing that now. And for instance, one of them is called the Blitz. It's where they go after researchers who are producing the inconvenient science. And for instance, one of the examples in that article about the Blitz, it's actually about the movie with Will Smith where he plays the pathologist who first described the disease that happened to retired American football players. It's called chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That pathologist wrote a paper, published a paper. His life went sideways because he threatened the industry of the NFL. By the way, the NFL industry is $9 billion. Pharmaceutical industry, $1 trillion.
Oh, wow.
So basically, myself and my colleagues, Professor Paul Marek, who founded the organization that we run together, we all lost our jobs, our careers, and this is what happens. We get blitzed.
What's pretty fascinating is that one gets the sense that scientists are approaching these subjects apolitically. And like, oh, listen, we've just got this information you might be interested in. Ivermectin as an anti-parasitic could be useful in the treatment. You better shut the fuck like that. Then you realise that you've been living in a kind of illusion. And it's astonishing, isn't it? Because whether it's, say, that the famous influence of the Sackler family over art institutions and their cultural influence and impact, for many years, surely the world of art relished and revelled in the patronage and a long historic tradition of patronage between wealthy individuals and wealthy organisations and the arts. And suddenly we are forced to recognise that, oh, the amount of investment that big pharma makes in academia, the buildings, the studies, the clinical trials that are funded, and perhaps more significantly, the clinical trials that are not funded, has always suggested control of the information. These are the studies. No one is conducting expensive trials into the efficacy of ivermectin because it's a generic and therefore not profitable drug. I just did that thing where I tell experts the thing that they're experts on. I do that as part of my job. I go up to an expert and go, you know that thing you know a lot about?
I think you're pretty deeply studied, Russell. I've listened to you before, so you're allowed.
Cheers, mate. And like, no one's been doing studies into vitamin D. No one's like, I remember this is interesting because in a sense we saw that Joe Rogan exploded into into a global figure even more than he had already during this period, because I suppose just conversationally, like any autodidact with the forum he has, was saying, well, shouldn't we all be going outside and exercising and eating healthy, and like with the kind of enthusiasm that you've described with some of your own papers. Hey, I took ivermectin and monoclonals or whatever that word was, and it seems to have worked a treat and was, experienced the blitz and then the slurs and the smears and the attacks. But then, curiously, the calculation was made that, hold on a second, Spotify, the money, leave this dude alone. And it's interesting that it's, back to an earlier part of our conversation, it's the insurance industries who revelations that can't be ignored. They've got to the point where, listen, we can't keep insuring people at the same rate because they're dying at an unprecedented rate. So the information, so now what has to happen is somehow that has to be either nullified or ameliorated. The truth's out there. Excess deaths is not a conspiracy theory. It's real. 158,000. That's more like if that had been a single event, if that had been caused by a group of people with accents and turbans, this would be a big story. But when it's caused by big pharma, let's just pretend this isn't happening.
Yeah, it's, what you kind of articulated a few moments ago about that kind of deep corrupt control of the pharmaceutical industry. I have to tell you, before COVID, I don't know what your knowledge was before COVID. I was not aware of the scope and the scale of the corruption. Before COVID, I venerated the high-impact medical journals like New England Journal of Medicine and Journal of American Medical Association, The Lancet, BMJ. I mean, if it was published in those journals, that's the best science and the best scientists. That is scientific truth. To get into those high-impact journals, I freely admit that when this started, you're going to be shocked at this, Russell, but I thought Fauci was like a sympathetic guy in a tough spot with a lot of critics. I kind of almost felt bad for him. I was like, he's doing the best he can. This is what I thought. I've said this before, I've thought New York Times was the paper of record, the arbiter of truth. You really want to know what's going on, you read the New York Times. And the evidence that I have amassed over these last 3 years is none of those things are true. Those journals are so completely run by the pharmaceutical industry, as are the agencies and its leaders. Everyone is working, as well as the media, they're all working in the interests of a massive, rapacious criminal industry. And it's transformed our world. And I call our country the United States of pharma. The influence of the pharmaceutical industry in the United States is unparalleled compared to any other industry. At the level of legislation, media, like I said, science, I used to think corruption I used to think pharmaceutical corruption was like the free pens and trips and like the attractive drug reps who come into the offices and buy lunch for the doctors. Like I thought it was like kind of marketing corruption.
Marketing.
You know, that's what I thought. This is before COVID. Now I go a lot deeper.
That's what it seemed like. I mean, even my references to the Sackler family, of course, then I'm a recovering drug addict myself, but the people that were dying because of the various ultra fentanyls and opioids were, oh, these are just sort of drug addicts. These are the kind of people we don't mind if they die. Those sort of people, they're supposed to die. This is almost population control. It's convenient. And like you say, the kind of somewhat innocuous presence of an attractive rep or a free bit of merch and a tidy pen has actually been exposed now as a veneer that concealed or at least distracted us from extraordinary control over the media, extraordinary control over the state, extraordinary control over our health and lives, unignorable corruption that amounts to an inversion of the stated purpose of such an industry, the wellness and well-being and health of Americans, or the citizens indeed of the world. I can't envisage a more pronounced corruption than making people sick in order to make money, rather than getting people healthy in alignment with, I don't know, the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah, that's the other realization. Some of my awakening evolution is I now have to accept that there are literal sociopaths at the tops of many different industries and corporations who show very little empathy for the common man. You can show this immense data and see the death and destruction wrought by these policies and products. They do not care.
You can follow Pierre Kory at Pierre Kory. There's a link to that. And you can see the entire conversation over the road. What a brilliant conversation it was. What I feel inspired by is the fact that there are medics, physicians and scientists, of course there are, that are reliable, trustworthy, that have integrity and that are willing to take bold risks. Thank you so much for watching us today. Remember, you can see us 5 days a week. In the meantime, if you can, stay free. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.